When I came home from school, I saw my mother's room door closed. I put a stool and looked through the skylight. My mother was giving my uncle pleasure with great pleasure. I was young. I started getting hot watching my mother's show. After a few minutes, my uncle started discharging, so my mother told my uncle that today I was inside me. I was the only child of my parents. And my father lived outside the country due to his job. Only my mother and I lived at home. When my father got a leave in a year, he would travel around Pakistan and stay for about a month and return. Life was going quite well. My father used to earn a good income and thus we never felt the lack of anything. There was only peace in life. There was happiness everywhere. But then I don't know whose evil eye fell on our happiness. My father was not at home. Sitarami did most of the outside work herself. However, some of my father's special friends often came to our house with their wives and children. If there was something that could not be done by the husband, he would come and do it. I liked almost all of Abu's friends. And I loved them all like my own daughters. One of Abu's friends, whose name was Salamat Mian, used to come to our house a lot, so I didn't like him coming to my house much. Although he had a very close relationship with Abu, I was very angry with him. Whenever I saw him, I would get confused with him. I talked to E many times that I didn't like Uncle Salamat at all. He would look at me strangely, tell him not to come to our house. But E would jokingly dismiss my words. He would start coming to our house every day with excuses. And instead of my mother stopping him from coming home every day, she would sit with him and laugh and talk a lot. I would also get angry with my mother. But what would I do now? I loved my mother too. In Abu's absence, all my responsibility was on her. That's why I just kept a deliberate silence. And I focused more on my studies. My exams were near, so I just focused on my studies day and night. Finally, God willing, the exams were over. The days were passing and Mir result was also close to coming. I wanted to get a big gift from Abu this time, but at the right time, I found out that he was not coming this time because some important work was going on in his company. I cried a lot after hearing the news of his absence. Almost a year had passed since I met him. But he still did not come. When the day of the results came, I was very sad. As always, this time too, I came first in my class, but due to Abu's absence, my happiness was shattered. Well, when I reached the school to pick up Mir result, I was surprised to see that she did not come alone. Rather, someone else had come with her. I thought maybe my father had come. Maybe he wanted to surprise me. But when I moved a little further and saw the man standing in front of me, my body started to heat up because the man was none other than Salamat Mian. I greeted him reluctantly and left from there on the pretext of meeting my friends. After a long time, I came home and was crying, missing my father. After a while, my mother and Salamat Sahib also came home. But I didn't talk to anyone. My mother tried to talk to me many times, but I didn't answer. Time kept passing. Whenever I talked to my father, I asked him to come back, but every time he would say that he would come next year for good and forever. I wanted to explain to him that my mother was giving his place to someone else. But I couldn't speak like that even if I wanted to. Maybe I was afraid that my father might scold me while talking so much. On the other hand, my mother spent most of her time with Salamat Mian. I don't know if his name was Salamat Mian or I used to call him Salamat Mian. I didn't know that. But whenever he spent time at our house, Salamat Mian would always be on my mother's tongue. She would often be seen talking to Salamat Mian on the phone. I stopped him a couple of times, but when he didn't listen, I also became silent. Well, next week was my birthday, but Abu wasn't coming. I was very sad that this was the first time this had happened. He wasn't here for my results or on my birthday. On the day of my birthday, I told my mother clearly that if Salamat Mian came, I wouldn't cut the cake, but she didn't listen to me. And in the evening, when the guests arrived, Salamat Mian was the first to sit on the sofa as a VIP. As soon as he saw me, a smile appeared on his face. It seemed as if my mother had already informed him about this. What I had done to them in the morning, well, now I was forced to do what I could in front of all the guests. So I had to endure them quietly. After cutting the cake, I immediately ran to my room and closed the door. After a while, I and Salamat Mian also followed me. There was a knock on the door. Even though I didn't want to, I had to open the door. As soon as I saw me, Salamat Mian said, "Hey, Sophia, daughter, you seem to be angry with us. Brother, what has happened to us? We should also know something." I remained silent and bowed in my eyes, then said, "Uncle, I am not feeling well, so I went to the room." Then I asked them both to leave. They also left silently. I missed my father a lot that day too. It was 2 in the morning. I was now feeling hungry. My hunger was making me weak. I opened the door and walked towards the kitchen with my feet pressed against it. I put the food on the plate from the kitchen and was about to turn back to my room when I saw Salamat Mian and Ami sitting together in front of me. I was very angry that after all the guests had left, why hadn't they left yet? I was curious to hear what they were talking about. So I stood quietly behind the door and listened to their conversation. Salamat Mian was sitting near Ami and was saying that today you were causing a stir in the pitch in a black suit. In the entire gathering, the eyes of all the guests were fixed only on you and I couldn't stop anyone even if I wanted to because I myself couldn't take my eyes off you. The color black really affects you. Hearing Salamat Mian's words, I got angry at him for how shamelessly he was talking to his friend's wife, while on the other hand, my mother, who was sitting in front of him, would remind him of his status at every word that you were my husband's only friend. Instead, she was smiling in the opposite direction. When I saw this scene, my eyes filled with tears. I got angry and threw the plate on the floor and ran to my room. As soon as my mother and Salamat Mian saw me, they were shocked and immediately followed me into the room. But by then I had closed the door of my room. I sobbed and cried for a long time. Then I don't know when I fell asleep. I didn't move at all. When Salamat Mian left our house, I had no idea. The next day, my mother came and hugged me and started loving me, but I don't know why I hated him. I was a child, but I wasn't so stupid that I couldn't understand what Samiri was doing to my father. She was cheating on my father, while he was away from us only for his and my comfort. Whatever she was doing for us so that we wouldn't feel any lack or any kind of trouble, but she was being unfaithful to him behind his back. Well, I was angry with my mother, but after her repeated persuasion, I agreed, and anyway, my mother had promised me that in the future she would not talk to Salamat Mian or let him come home. That was enough for my happiness, and because of that, I started laughing like before again. Time passed. Life was back on track. I was happy that everything was fine. But maybe I was wrong. One day, I suddenly felt unwell at school. My teacher called Cha Khairuddin after seeing my condition deteriorating. Cha Khairuddin was the dean of our school. The teacher told me that Cha Khairuddin is coming. You go home with him. And go and rest. Take some medicine, etc. After a while, Cha Khairuddin took me from school and came home. He dropped me off near the house and left. There were 2 keys to the main gate of the house. I had one and my mother had one. I put the key in the lock and opened the gate and went inside. You had a habit that whenever I entered the house, I used to greet you loudly. As usual, I greeted you, but unexpectedly, there was no response. I looked around and there was no one. Then I thought that maybe my mother had gone to the market or was taking care of her plants on the upper floor. My mother was very fond of keeping plants and she also made a small garden on the dead body. I took out juice from the freezer and sat in the TV lounge and drank juice. It had been a long time since I had seen my mother. When I went upstairs, I reached the pocket of the room on the right side. I could hear soft voices from inside. Upon reflection, I realized that my mother was inside, but there was a male voice with her. How could I not recognize this voice? It was Salamat Mian's voice. My upper breath rose and my lower breath fell. I also thought that today I would have to live with my mother knowing the truth about what was going on between them. I reached the outer side of the room through the terrace. Then I brought a chair and placed it on it. I actually wanted to see what was going on inside by leaning against the ceiling light. The ceiling light in the room was very high. I climbed onto the stool panting. As soon as I put my neck in the lampshade and looked, I screamed. When I quickly pulled my neck out, the top of my head hit the top of the lampshade. My feet slipped due to panic and I fell to the ground with a thud. Of course, they also heard the sound of my fall. When I opened my eyes, I found myself on the bed. My mother was standing in front of me and a doctor was consoling my mother. My arm and head were badly injured. My mother could not make eye contact with me. Perhaps she knew that I had caught her crime. She tried to talk to me, but I did not talk to her or respond to anything she said. For the next few days, I had a high fever. My mother would come to me again and again to ask how I was doing. She kept on waiting for me, but the place she had in my heart was no longer there. My fever was not getting better. Because it was such a big shock. How could I bear it? I was also very angry that I should not have done all this that day. I knew that something was going on between my mother and Salamat Mian, but the way I saw them that day, I was ashamed to tell them. They had crossed all limits. When Abu came to know about my condition, he could not leave me, and in the next few days, Abu came to my place in Pakistan. As soon as I saw Abu, I hugged him tightly and cried. I could not leave him. I was afraid that I would leave him. And then he would go away from me again. When Abu saw my condition, he started getting angry at my mother, saying, "Why didn't you tell me earlier that this was so sad for me?" I kept avoiding his words, thinking that I was a child, but you were an adult. Despite this condition, you kept telling me that everything is fine here. Don't worry, just come once. Abu's anger was terrible. You listened quietly. Don't say anything further. She even spoke. She also knew that it was all her own fault. After listening to Abu's words, I understood why Afi was stopping them from coming here. She knew that if Abu returned, their secret might be revealed, but perhaps nature had agreed to it that way. The secret would be revealed, so it happened. After that, Abu shifted to Pakistan forever. I also kept quiet and didn't tell him anything about Abu Kwai and Salamat Mian because I didn't want our happy home to be ruined. I just didn't talk to my mother anymore. If there was something important, I would do it, otherwise I would spend most of my time in my room. I thought that the storm that was about to come would subside, but it didn't happen. A few months after Abu's return, my mother started arguing with Abu. Maybe she didn't want to live with Abu anymore. She demanded a divorce from Abu. She left this house and went to live in Salamat Mian's house. All of Abu's friends came to know that Salamat Mian and my mother were having an affair, and that's why she divorced Abu. People started talking about all sorts of things. Abu was completely devastated, but thank God I was old enough and wise enough to take care of myself. Abu and I were the only ones living at home. Shortly after my divorce from Abu, my mother married Salamat Mian. And I will live my life happily. Once or twice, seeing Abu sad, I said that I will get you married again, but he strictly forbade me to ever mention this after today. He still loves his mother and often feels sad remembering her. Abu now had only one wish, that somehow I would get married as soon as possible. I still wanted to study. Now he could not manage the entire household alone. Not even a year passed like this and finally he got me married to the son of one of his friends. I used to visit my father every week. However, I also missed my mother a lot. But she also did not hear from us even after returning. 5 years passed like this. Now I myself had become a mother of 4 children. I used to get tired of taking care of them all day long. My husband's name was fixed. Today when he came home from the office, I told him clearly that Mateen Sahib, I can no longer take care of 4 children for you. Please give me a nanny. He looked at me with a loving look and said, "Come on, I will arrange a nanny for you tomorrow." I knew that he loved me very much. Despite his limited income, he would not refuse. Qari Jamshed Sahib used to live in our neighborhood and taught the Holy Quran to almost all the children of the neighborhood. He used to visit many houses and he also had very kind prayers and greetings for Mateen. When Moeen mentioned the nanny to him, he said, "Yes, there is a woman, a poor, very forced woman, a lonely woman, her husband has left her and she has no children. You just give her 2 meals a day, she will agree to it." Mateen immediately agreed. The next day, it was evening. There was a knock at the door. I was also waiting for the nanny. Mateen had told me that a woman would come this evening. If it suits you, hire her. I opened the door before she could say anything. As soon as I saw her, I screamed. Her hair had turned completely white. She was wearing a sloppy suit. And that woman, who looked like the spring of centuries, was none other than my mother. I quickly held her hand and brought her inside. I was completely lost. Seeing her in this state, not a word could come out of her mouth. I arranged for her to bathe, washed her, and fed her a good meal. She had been sitting completely mute since she had come. I held her hand and said, "Mom, please talk to me." She was just getting ready. It took her a long time to get back to normal. And it turned out that Salamat Mian had stolen all her jewelry. And the house she had rented out was also registered in his name by Salamat Mian. After selling him, he left the country. Now my mother had no home and no one to earn money. This is the case with Qari Jamshed Sahib, whom my mother had met on the road begging in a state of fainting, and she took pity on him and brought him to her house and gave him shelter in her house. 3 months passed like this. I had given him the upper room of my house for accommodation. When my father came to know about this whole story, he was also very sad and told me that whatever your mother did was wrong, but it was not all her fault. Every wife needs a good life partner, and I did not come home for many years. I am also an equal partner in this crime. Well, you did a very good job of keeping her with you. After all, she is your mother. Now, despite my forbidding her, she used to take care of my children every day. I tried to tell Mateen to arrange another nanny, but he strictly forbade me. It was evening time and I was worried. I went to the room to see my mother. She was sitting in prayer and crying. May Allah forgive me for all my sins. May Allah accept my repentance. She was just repenting to Allah Almighty for her sins and was crying. I ran to her and hugged her. She kept crying on my neck for a long time, but now the sound of crying had stopped. When I pushed her a little behind me, her neck suddenly fell into my lap. I screamed. Hearing my scream, Mateen also ran away. My mother had left me. Maybe this was the time for repentance, and maybe her repentance had been accepted.